So tell us, are you concerned or not concerned by some of this hyperbole?
I am ringing the alarm over it. AI requires the AI arms ratio, as you described it, requires capital. It's a very expensive endeavor. And so for the idea that a venture capital firm would take money from investors in the US, send it to China to build a product that could be used against US interests makes zero sense.
Okay, demystify from that perspective, therefore, whether the money should be being pulled back from privately positioned businesses, but also we were just talking about how Alibaba, for example, is set to, as soon as next week, unveil its own competitor to ChatGPT. I look at who the biggest shareholders are of Alibaba, and, well, on the American Depository Receipt perspective, it's Goldman. There's Morgan Stanley in there. Should they all be giving up on backing some of these public companies?
I think in general, there's opportunity in other markets. Understood, it's capitalism, we agree with that. But there are certain technologies, for instance, if Intel makes chips that can be used in North Korean missiles, we don't allow that in the US. This is exactly the same. US capital and also US know-how shouldn't be used in creating these AI tools, because after you make an investment, you actually have a responsibility to make sure that company is successful. And therefore, you're helping to make sure that China is successful.
Ed, it's interesting that certain names within the VC community were highlighted by this information piece in particular, because they have venture arms in China. One of them really spoke out on Twitter.
Yeah, and the idea here is that Sequoia has come out, one of their partners on Twitter, I think we'll show it on the screen now, and said Sequoia China and Sequoia are different. The headline was misleading. Brian, let's go back to the point. Investors have been going to China tech for a long time. This is specifically an anxiety coming around artificial intelligence, right? Why? Why is AI so problematic?
Well, I'll answer both things. On the different arms piece, when Sequoia is out raising money in China, they're saying, we're Sequoia, we're the brand, we know what we're doing, we can build the best companies. That's why you're going to give money to either arm. So though they may be legally separate entities, it is literally one strategy to create the world's most successful companies. And in this case, that's an issue. And to the second point, like, why is this so dangerous? I often describe AI as like dog years, right? So it's not aging year by year. Every year is 3 or 5 or 7 years. And so only a couple of years from now, what they're creating could be used to create a surveillance state, not just there, but also here.
Brian, you are an AI expert. You consider yourself an AI expert. I think your prior successes include the sale of an AI company you founded. Are you worried that this is just the threat of competition from China outdoing what's happening in the United States?
That's certainly true. But the way that Chinese companies go about the AI space is different. I remember when I started my company, Kairos, we had the #1 source of attacks were from China. #2 source of the attacks were from Russia. Constantly trying to get access to the data so they could then use that in their own uses. They just don't have the same approach toward the morality around these technologies that we do in the US.
In fact, we've seen some issues with the morality, the ethics, the speed of development here in the US itself as well. That open letter coming from hundreds of signatories wanting a pause on AI development here in the United States. Brian, from your perspective, therefore, is the US at risk of losing this battle versus the Chinese? And what more do you want put in place from a federal level even?
I think it's a good point there. Our house and our hands are not clean either in the world of AI. We can do better. We can be better. But there is a process and a system that can allow for an improved AI. And we're having those conversations now with morality leading the goal. Oftentimes in China, these are not conversations, or they're conversations held in back rooms. And I think that's one of the challenges.
What about the reverse? I know that we have CFIUS in this country, but are you against, say, Saudi money or Chinese money coming in and investing in the AI field for US-based startups?
No, I'm completely inconsistent on this matter. I'm happy to take those dollars here and to use those, into our framework. That said, I wouldn't want those technologies to be exported back to Saudi or back to China and used for human rights violations.
From your perspective, Brian, What stops this? Because in many ways, if you're seeing it from a negative perspective, US money going to China, you're already saying, look, Pandora's box has been opened. People went out there, did joint ventures with China, because at that point, everyone was trying to build a more global and globalized state of capitalism. How do you unwind that?
Yeah, I think China's evolved over time, as has the American position. I think you're seeing both on the right and the left real concerns around TikTok and other platforms. The genie is out of the bottle, certainly, but in this case, it's not too late to put it back in. Regulation can put us where we need to be if we have the strength to put it in place.